When 17-year-old Maya stepped into the glass-walled corner office clutching her crumpled resume, she never expected her quiet confession about sleeping in her car to unlock a secret that would change both their lives forever. Because the CEO she was desperately trying to impress was actually the father who had abandoned her 13 years ago, and the words she spoke next would either heal a broken family or destroy her last chance at survival. The elevator doors had whispered shut behind her like a prayer, carrying her 30 floors above the city, where hope felt as distant as the Mia clouds. Her worn sneakers squeaked against polished marble as she approached the reception desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. The building smelled of success and expensive coffee, everything she'd never known. "I'm here about the job," she whispered to the pristine receptionist, who looked at her with barely concealed pity before pointing toward the corner office, where destiny waited like this video. If you've ever found strength in your most vulnerable moment, Richard Sterling had built his empire on reading people, on knowing when someone was lying or desperate or dangerous. But as he sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at the thin girl with tangled brown hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, every instinct he'd honed over 43 years abandoned him completely. "Maya Chun," he read from the crumpled resume, his voice catching on the last name like a fish hook in his throat. The paper trembled in his hands as memories crashed over him like a tsunami. Maya Chun, his Maya, the baby he'd held for exactly 7 months before everything fell apart. She was talking, explaining how she'd been living in her car for 3 weeks. How she'd apply for anything, even cleaning toilets, if it meant a paycheck. But Richard couldn't hear her words over the roar of his own heartbeat. 13 years. 13 years since he'd walked away from the tiny apartment where she'd taken her first steps, said her first word, Dada, a word that now felt like a blade between his ribs. His hands moved without conscious thought, sliding open the bottom drawer of his desk, where he kept the things that mattered. Buried beneath contracts and legal documents was a faded photograph, edges worn from handling. A younger version of himself smiled up at him, holding a baby with the same storm cloud eyes, the same defiant chin that now sat across from him, waiting for judgment. "Sir?" Maya's voice cut through his paralysis. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost. Yes, that's exactly what she was. The ghost of every choice he'd made, every night he'd lain awake, wondering if she was safe, if she was happy, if she remembered him at all. The ghost of the man he'd been before ambition and pride had poisoned everything he touched. "I'm fine," he lied, closing the drawer and forcing himself to meet her eyes. Those eyes. How many times had he dreamed of those eyes? "Tell me about your experience." Maya straightened in her chair, and Richard saw flashes of the determined woman she was becoming. "I don't have much formal experience, but I learn fast. I had to grow up pretty quick after my mom got sick. I can handle pressure, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Your mom." The words hit him like a physical blow. Sarah, beautiful, stubborn. Sarah who'd loved him despite his flaws, who'd believed in him when he was nothing more than a college dropout with big dreams and empty pockets. Sarah who tried to call him 2 years ago, according to the private investigator he'd hired too late. Sarah who died thinking he didn't care. "What kind of work are you looking for?" he asked, though he already knew what he was going to offer her. He had to offer her something, anything to keep her close, to have a chance to know the woman his daughter had become. "Anything," Maya said, and there was no shame in her voice, only desperate honesty. "I just need a chance. I'm not asking for charity, just an opportunity to prove myself." Richard's throat tightened. She had no idea who he was, what he'd done, what he'd thrown away. She was asking her own father for a job, and he was sitting there like a coward, hiding behind his desk. And his success, and his carefully constructed life. "I have a position available," he heard himself say. "It's entry level, but it comes with benefits and room for advancement." "When can you start?" Maya's face transformed, hope lighting her features like sunrise. "Are you serious? Really?" "I can. Start right now, today, whatever you need." "Monday," he said, though he wanted to keep her here forever, to make up for 13 years of absence in a single afternoon. "Report to Elena Martinez in Human Resources at 9 a.m. She'll handle your paperwork." As Maya stood to leave, clutching her resume like a lifeline, Richard felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on him. She was his daughter who'd been sleeping in her car while he lived in a penthouse. His daughter, who'd just thanked him with tears in her eyes for giving her a chance. "Maya," he called as she reached the door. She turned back, and for a moment he saw the baby she'd been, the child he'd abandoned, the woman he'd failed to protect. "Welcome to Sterling Tech." After she left, Richard sat alone in his office, staring at the faded photograph. Tomorrow, he would begin the impossible task of earning forgiveness from the daughter who didn't even know she was forgiving him. Tomorrow, he would try to become the father he should have been 13 years ago. But tonight, he would mourn the man he'd been and the time he could never get back. Maya arrived at Sterling Tech 45 minutes early, her hair still damp from the gas station bathroom, where she tried to make herself presentable. The employee ID badge felt like a talisman in her pocket, proof that Friday afternoon hadn't been a dream. She had a job, a real job with benefits and a future. The lobby buzzed with Monday morning energy. Employees in crisp suits moved with purpose, their conversations filled with technical jargon and corporate speak that sounded like a foreign language. Maya tugged at her thrift store blazer, hoping the safety pin holding the button was invisible. "You must be Maya," a warm voice said behind her. Maya turned to find a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "I'm Elena Martinez. Ready for your first day?" Elena guided her through the maze of cubicles and conference rooms, explaining company policies and procedures with patient thoroughness. But Maya noticed something else in Elena's manner, a watchfulness, as if she was studying Maya for reasons that had nothing to do with training. "You'll be working primarily with the executive team," Elena explained as they reached a desk positioned perfectly between the main office and Richard's corner suite. "Data entry, filing, scheduling. Nothing too complicated to start." Maya settled into her chair, running her fingers over the nameplate someone had already prepared. Maya Chun, administrative assistant. It was the first nameplate she'd ever owned, and she had to blink back tears. "Mr. Sterling specifically requested this placement," Elena added carefully. "He seems to think you'll do well here." Through the glass wall, Maya could see Richard at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly. He looked different from Friday, more composed, more like the successful CEO she'd expected. But when he caught her looking, his hand stilled mid-gesture, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "Is he always so double quotes?" Maya searched for the word. "Intense?" Elena followed her gaze. "Richard Sterling is a complicated man. He's brilliant, demanding, but fair. He doesn't usually take such personal interest in new hires, though." She paused, studying Maya's profile. "You remind me of someone, but I can't place who." The morning flew by in a blur of passwords and procedures. Maya absorbed everything Elena taught her, filing away information with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that mistakes could be fatal. By lunch, she'd organized 3 months of backlogged files and created a digital system that would prevent future pileups. "Impressive," Elena murmured, reviewing Maya's work. "Most people take weeks to get organized. You've done it in 4 hours." "I've had practice," Maya said, thinking of the careful organization required to live in a car, every possession cataloged, every dollar accounted for, every day planned around survival. That afternoon, Richard emerged from his office, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Chun, could you pull the Morrison files for me? I need them for the 3 o'clock meeting." Maya located the files in minutes, having memorized the entire filing system during her morning reorganization. As she handed them over, their fingers brushed, as she felt him tense. "Double quote, sir. Are you feeling all right? You seem ... She hesitated, then plowed ahead. "You seem like you're avoiding me." Richard's mask slipped for just a moment. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm observing. You're remarkably capable for someone with no office experience." "I'm a quick learner," Maya replied, meeting his gaze directly, "and I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Don't be too grateful," he said quietly. "In my experience, gratitude can be dangerous." Before Maya could ask what he meant, his phone rang, and he retreated to his office. But through the glass wall, she caught him watching her, his expression unreadable. By 5 o'clock, Maya had revolutionized the filing system, updated 3 databases, and impressed half the executive team with her efficiency. As she prepared to leave, Elena approached her desk. "You did well today," Elena said, but her tone carried an undercurrent of concern. "Maya, Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Your mother, what was her name? Maya's chest tightened. Sarah Chan. Why? Elena's face went pale. What was her maiden name? Rodriguez. Sarah Rodriguez, before she married my father. Maya's voice caught. Before he left us. Elena stared at her for a long moment, then glanced toward Richard's office. What did your father do? For work, I mean. I don't know. Mom never talked about him. She just said he was young and scared and not ready to be a father. Maya's voice hardened. She said he chose his career over his family. Through the glass, Richard was gathering his things, his movements sharp and mechanical. Elena watched him, her expression growing more troubled by the second. Maya, Elena said carefully, what do you know about your father? His name, what he looked like? Nothing. Mom threw away all the pictures. She said it was better to forget him than to waste time hating him. Maya shouldered her bag, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. Why all the questions? Elena forced a smile. Just curious. You have such distinctive eyes. Very unusual color. As Maya left Sterling Tech, she felt the familiar weight of uncertainty. She had a job, a purpose, a future she hadn't dared imagine a week ago. But something about Elena's questions nagged at her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her new boss was hiding something important. Behind her, 30 floors up, Richard Sterling stood at his window, watching his daughter disappear into the crowd. His reflection stared back at him from the glacis. Man who'd built an empire, but lost the only thing that mattered. Tomorrow, he would try again to find the courage to tell her the truth. Tomorrow, he would try to become the father she deserved. But tonight, he would count the hours until he could see her again. This stranger who was his daughter, this miracle who'd walked back into his life, carrying nothing but hope and a crumpled resume. 2 weeks into her new life at Sterling Tech, Maya had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. She'd found a small studio apartment she could afford with her first paycheck, complete with a functioning shower and a bed that didn't require her to sleep curled in a ball. The simple luxury of space made her feel rich beyond measure. She was updating Richard's calendar when he appeared at her desk, coffee in hand and that same careful expression he wore whenever he looked at her directly. Maya, I noticed you mentioned having some of your mother's belongings in storage. Are you planning to retrieve them? The question caught her off guard. Richard rarely made personal conversation, keeping their interactions strictly professional, despite the inexplicable attention he paid to her work. I haven't been able to afford the storage fees, she admitted, heat creeping up her neck. They're probably going to auction everything off soon. Richard's jaw tightened. What's in storage? Just ... memories, I guess. Photo albums, her jewelry, some furniture. Nothing valuable to anyone else. Maya's voice grew smaller. I kept telling myself I'd get them when I got back on my feet. But now, I'll drive you, Richard said abruptly. This afternoon. Consider it a company errand. I need to pick up some files from across town anyway. Maya stared at him. Sir, you don't have to. I insist. Alana can cover the phones for an hour. The storage facility squatted on the edge of the industrial district, a collection of beige buildings that looked like they'd been designed to crush hope. Maya's hands shook as she entered the code for Unit 47, the metal door rolling up with a screech that echoed through the concrete corridors. Inside, her mother's life sat in neat stacks, waiting, furniture draped in sheets, boxes labeled in Sarah's careful handwriting, Maya's baby clothes, kitchen items, photos family. Each label was a small punch to the chest. Richard stood beside her, unusually quiet. When Maya began lifting boxes, he stepped forward to help without being asked, his expensive suit collecting dust as he moved furniture with surprising strength. You don't have to do this, Maya said, watching him maneuver a dresser toward the rental truck. I can manage. I know you can, he replied, but he didn't stop helping. They worked in comfortable silence. Maya occasionally pausing to touch a familiar object, her mother's favorite lamp, the rocking chair where Sarah had read her bedtime stories. Each item carried the weight of memory. The phantom scent of her mother's perfume. It was in the last box that Maya found the letters. Oh God, she whispered, pulling out a bundle of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon. Her mother's handwriting covered each one, but the addresses were different. Some were to Maya herself, others to people she didn't recognize. And one, yellowed with age, was addressed to someone named Richard Sterling. The world tilted. Maya's vision blurred as she stared at the envelope. Her mother's careful script spelling out a name she'd heard every day for 2 weeks. A name that belonged to her boss, the man who'd given her a job when she had nothing. Maya? Richard's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's wrong? She held up the envelope with trembling fingers. This is addressed to you. Richard went completely still. The color drained from his face as he stared at the letter, and Maya saw something that looked like grief and terror and guilt all mixed together. I can explain, he said quietly. Explain what? Maya's voice cracked. How do you explain my mother writing you a letter? How do you explain? She stopped, her mind racing through the past 2 weeks. His strange behavior, Elena's questions, the way he watched her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Maya, please, who are you? She whispered. Who are you really? Richard's hands clenched at his sides. I'm someone who made terrible mistakes. Someone who lost the most important things in his life because he was too proud and too scared to fight for them. Maya's knees gave out. She sat down hard on a box of her mother's books, the letter clutched against her chest. You're him. You're my father. The words hung in the dusty air between them. 13 years of absence crystallized into a single moment of recognition. Richard's face crumpled, and for a second, Maya saw not the successful CEO, but a broken man carrying the weight of his failures. I've been looking for you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For years, I've been looking for you. Your mother, she moved so many times, changed her number. I hired investigators, but she was always one step ahead. She was running from you, Maya said, understanding flooding through her. All those moves, all those times she said we needed a fresh start. She was running from you. She was protecting you, Richard corrected. From me, from the man I was then. Young, selfish, more interested in building my career than building a family. Maya stood up on shaking legs, the letter still pressed to her chest. You left us. You left me. I was 24 years old and terrified, Richard said, stepping closer. Your mother was struggling. You were crying all the time, and I felt like I was drowning. So I ran. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd come back when I was ready, when I could provide for you properly. But you never came back. By the time I tried, you were gone. Your mother had moved, left no forwarding address. I thought ... I thought maybe you were better off without me. Maya looked down at the letter in her hands. Her mother's final words to the man who'd shaped their lives through his absence. She never stopped loving you, she said quietly. She never said it, but I could tell. She got this look in her eyes sometimes, like she was remembering something beautiful and painful at the same time. Richard's breath caught. Read it, he said. Please, read what she wrote. Maya's fingers trembled as she tore open the envelope. The letter was dated 2 months before her mother's death, written in Sarah's increasingly shaky handwriting as the cancer progressed. Richard, Maya read aloud, her voice breaking. If you're reading this, then Maya found her way to you somehow. I always hoped she would. I want you to know that I never told her to hate you. I told her you were young and scared, because that's the truth. I told her you weren't ready to be a father, because that was true too. But I never told her that you didn't love her, because I knew that wasn't true. Maya stopped reading, tears blurring the words. Richard stood frozen, his face a mask of pain and hope and desperate love. She forgave you, Maya whispered. In the end, she forgave you. Can you? Richard asked, his voice breaking. Can you ever forgive me? Maya looked at her father, this stranger who'd given her a job, who'd helped her move her mother's belongings, who'd been watching her with the desperate love of a parent who'd lost too much time. She thought of the 13 years of absence, the nights she'd wondered why she wasn't worth staying for, the carefully constructed life she'd built around the hole his leaving had created. But she also thought of the past 2 weeks, of the way he'd looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, of the kindness he'd shown to a desperate girl with a crumpled resume. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I want to try. Richard's shoulders sagged with relief. That's all I can ask for. That's more than I deserve. As they loaded the last of her mother's belongings into the truck, Maya felt the weight of her world shifting. She had a father. She had a family. She had 13 years of anger and hurt and love to work through. But for the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't alone. The silence in the truck was heavy with unspoken words as they drove back toward the city. Maya's mother's belongings filled the cargo space, each box a testament to a life lived in the shadows of choices made long ago. Richard's hands gripped a steering wheel with white knuckles, his jaw clenched against the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Pull over," Maya said suddenly. "Please, just pull over." Richard guided the truck into an empty parking lot, the engine ticking. As it cooled, Maya sat motionless, staring at the envelope in her lap, the weight of her mother's words still settling in her chest. "I need to know everything," she said, without looking at him. "Not just the easy parts, or the parts that make you look better. I need to know why you really left." Richard killed the engine and turned to face her. In the fading afternoon light, Maya could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the weight of 13 years of regret. "Your mother was working double shifts at the diner," he began, his voice rough. "I was trying to finish my computer science degree while working nights at a warehouse. We were broke, constantly fighting about money, about the future. You were colicky, crying for hours every night. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a time in months." Maya said nothing, but her grip on the letter tightened. "I was developing software in my spare time, trying to build something that would get us out of that one-bedroom apartment. I was so sure I was going to be the next tech genius that I just needed one big break." Richard's laugh was bitter. "I was 24 and full of dreams and completely unprepared for the reality of being a father. So you left," Maya said flatly. "I panicked. One night, you were crying. Sarah was crying. And I couldn't breathe. I told myself I was going to drive around the block, clear my head, but I kept driving. I drove to my buddy's place, crashed on his couch, telling myself it was just for one night. But it wasn't just one night. No, one night became a week. A week became a month. Every day I told myself I'd go back, but I was so ashamed of leaving that I couldn't face her. And then I got my first real job offer, and I convinced myself that I needed to establish myself first, make enough money to really provide for you both." Maya finally looked at him, her eyes hard as granite. "How long? How long what? How long before you tried to come back?" Richard's face crumpled. 3 years. "It took me 3 years to find the courage to try to find you. By then, you'd moved. The landlord said Sarah had left no forwarding address. I hired a private investigator, but she was careful. She'd learned how to disappear because she was afraid of you, because she was protecting you from me," Richard corrected. "I was a mess, Maya, successful professionally, but a complete disaster personally. I was working 16-hour days, living on coffee and ambition. I wasn't ready to be a father then, and she knew it." Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing. "She kept things," she said finally. "Pictures of you. From before. She thought I didn't know, but I found them once when I was 12. She kept them in a shoebox under her bed." Richard's breath caught. "She did? You looked happy in the pictures. Young and scared, like she always said, but happy." Maya's voice grew softer. "She looked happy too. That's what I never understood. If you were both so miserable, why did you both look so happy in the pictures?" "Because we were happy," Richard said simply. "Before the stress and the poverty and the fear took over, we were happy. We were kids playing house, and for a while, it was beautiful." Maya pulled something from her purse, a small music box. "It's paint-chipped and faded. Do you recognize this?" Richard's eyes widened. "I gave that to you for your first birthday. It was the last gift I gave you before I left." Maya wound the key, and a tinkling melody filled the truck. "La Vie en Rose," she said. "Mom used to play it when I couldn't sleep. She said it was a song about seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, about believing in love even when everything else was falling apart. I sang it to you," Richard whispered, "when you were a baby. It was the only song that would calm you down." Maya's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as the melody played, each note a bridge between the man who'd left and the father she'd never known. "I hate you," she said, the words broken by sobs. "I hate you for leaving, and I hate you for making me care about you now. I hate that I spent my whole life wondering What was wrong with me that my own father couldn't stay? Richard wanted to reach for her, to hold her like he should have done 13 years ago, but he forced himself to remain still. There was nothing wrong with you. You were perfect. You were the best thing I'd ever done, and I was too young and too stupid to see it. Then why? Maya's voice was raw with pain. Why wasn't I enough to make you stay? Because I was a coward, Richard said simply. Because I was selfish and scared, and I convinced myself that you'd be better off without me. I was wrong about everything, but I was especially wrong about that. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The music box, still playing its haunting melody. Mom never dated anyone else, she said. Not once. I asked her about it when I was older, and she said she'd had her great love story, and that was enough for one lifetime. Richard felt something break inside his chest. She was too good for me. She always was. She was, Maya agreed. But she loved you anyway. Even after everything, she loved you. They sat in silence as the music box wound down, the last notes fading into the evening air. Maya closed the lid and held it against her chest, this tangible connection to the father she'd never known. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I don't know how to be your daughter. I don't know how to be your father, Richard admitted, but I'd like to learn, if you'll let me. Maya looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the revelation. She saw the expensive suit and the careful grooming, but beneath it all, she saw the young man from her mother's photographs, scared, hopeful, desperate to make amends for the choices that had shaped them both. I'm angry, she said. I'm so angry, I can barely think straight, but I'm also tired. And I'm alone, and I don't know how to do this by myself anymore. You're not alone, Richard said. Not anymore. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but if you'll give me one, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the time we lost. Maya studied his face, looking for the lie, the catch, the moment when his promises would crumble like everything else in her life. But all she saw was a man who'd made terrible choices and was desperate for the chance to make better ones. Okay, she said finally, but I have conditions. We take this slow. We don't pretend to be a happy family overnight. And if you hurt me, if you disappear again, I'm done. No second chances, no explanations. I'm done. Richard nodded, relief flooding his features. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. As they drove back into the city, Maya felt the weight of her world shifting again. She had a father now, but she also had 13 years of walls to tear down, 13 years of hurt to work through. The music box sat silent in her lap, holding the memory of a lullaby and the promise of a future neither of them could yet imagine. But for the first time in months, Maya felt something she'd almost forgotten, hope, fragile and tentative, but real. It was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. Elena Martinez had been watching Richard Sterling for 12 years. And she'd never seen him look as shattered as he did the morning after the storage unit revelation. He sat in his office staring at nothing, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, his usual commanding presence replaced by something fragile and uncertain. Maya hadn't come in yet, and Elena could see the way Richard's eyes darted to the clock every few minutes, fear written plainly across his face. He was terrified that his daughter wouldn't return, that the truth would drive her away, just as it had driven away her mother. Elena knocked softly on his door. Richard, may I come in? He looked up as if surfacing from deep water. Of course. What can I do for you? It's more about what I can do for you, Elena said, settling into the chair across from his desk. She pulled out a small leather journal, its pages worn from years of use. I've been keeping notes. Richard's expression sharpened. What kind of notes? About you. About your behavior patterns, your moods, your tells. Elena opened the journal to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. March 15th, 2 years ago. You came in with red eyes, claiming allergies, but it was the anniversary of something. You stared at your phone all day, like you were waiting for a call that never came. Richard's jaw tightened. Elena, May 22nd last year, you left work early, said you had a family emergency. But you don't have any family, Richard. At least, none that anyone knows about. Elena turned another page. And then 3 weeks ago, Maya Chun walked into your office, and everything changed. Richard leaned back in his chair, his mask of composure slipping entirely. How long have you known? I suspected the moment I saw her. She has your eyes, your stubborn chin, your way of tilting her head when she's thinking. Elena smiled sadly. And she has her mother's smile. I met Sarah once. Did you know that? Richard's face went white. You what? 2 years ago. She came to the building, asked for you at the front desk. Security called me because she seemed fragile, sick. She said she was an old friend, that she just wanted to see you for a few minutes. Alana's voice grew gentle. I told her you were in meetings all day, offered to take a message. She said no, that it was better this way, that some things were better left in the past. She was here, Richard whispered. Sarah was here, and you didn't tell me? She made me promise not to. She said she'd only come to see what kind of man you'd become, whether you'd be good for Maya or just another disappointment. Elena closed the journal. She said she was proud of what you'd built, but worried about what you'd become. She asked me to watch over you, in case Maya ever needed you. Richard buried his face in his hands. She was dying, and she came to check on me. Jesus, Elena, what kind of person does that make me? Human, Elena said simply. It makes you human. Flawed, but human. I don't know what I'm doing, Richard confessed. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to fix 13 years of absence. I don't even know if she'll come back today. Elena leaned forward. Richard, I'm going to tell you something that might hurt, but you need to hear it. You can't fix 13 years of absence. You can't undo the damage or take back the choices you made. But you can choose what you do from this moment forward. What if I fail her again? Then you'll have to live with that. But what if you don't? What if you become the father she needs now, instead of mourning the father you weren't then? Elena opened her journal to a different page, her handwriting more recent. Maya's been here 3 weeks, and in that time, she's reorganized our entire filing system, streamlined our communication protocols, and impressed every executive she's worked with. She's brilliant, Richard, and she's strong, stronger than you were at her age. She had to be, Richard said quietly. Because I wasn't there to protect her. No, you weren't. But she survived anyway. She thrived anyway. And now she's here, and she's giving you a chance you don't deserve, but that she's offering anyway. Alana's voice grew firm. Don't waste it feeling sorry for yourself. Richard looked up, something shifting in his expression. What should I do? Be patient. Be honest. Be present. Elena stood, smoothing her skirt. And Richard, let her be angry. She has every right to be angry. Don't try to rush her forgiveness or make her feel guilty for her feelings. Just be here every day. Show up. As if summoned by their conversation, Maya appeared in the doorway. She looked pale and tired, her usual composure replaced by visible uncertainty. Elena felt her heart squeeze at the sight of this young woman trying to navigate an impossible situation. Am I interrupting? Maya asked, her voice carefully neutral. Not at all, Elena said, gathering her journal. I was just heading out. Maya, could I speak with you for a moment, privately? Richard nodded his understanding and watched as the two women stepped into the hallway. Elena guided Maya to a quiet corner near the break room, away from curious ears. How are you holding up? Elena asked gently. Maya's careful composure cracked slightly. I don't know. I feel like I'm living in someone else's life. 3 weeks ago, I was sleeping in my car, and now I find out my boss is my father. It's insane. It is insane, Elena agreed. But it's also your reality now. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I don't know, Maya admitted. Part of me wants to run. It would be easier, cleaner, but another part of me, ... She trailed off, struggling with the words. Another part of you wants to see what happens if you stay, Elena finished. Maya nodded, tears threatening. I've been angry at him my whole life, but now that he's real, now that I can see how sorry he is, I don't know how to hate him anymore. Elena pulled a tissue from her pocket and handed it to Maya. Can I tell you something about my own father? Maya nodded. I didn't meet my father until I was 25. He'd been deported when I was 3, sent back to Mexico. My mother told me he was dead because it was easier than explaining why he couldn't come home. Elena's voice grew distant with memory. When I finally found him, I was so angry. 22 years of thinking he'd abandoned us. And it turned out he'd been trying to get back to us the whole time. What did you do? I yelled at him for hours. I screamed and cried and told him about every birthday he'd missed, every time I needed a father, and he wasn't there. And you know what he did? Maya shook her head. He listened. He didn't make excuses or try to justify what had happened. He just listened and apologized, and told me he understood why I was angry. Elena smiled sadly. It took 2 years before I could call him Dad without feeling like a fraud. But those 2 years taught me something important. Forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a journey. And it's one you have to choose to take every single day. Maya wiped her eyes. Did you regret it? Trying to have a relationship with him? Never. Not for a single day. Even when it was hard. Even when we fought. Even when I wanted to give up. Because at the end of the day, he was my father, and I was his daughter. And that meant something. It meant we were family. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Richard, my father, he looks at me like I'm going to disappear. Like he's afraid I'm not real. Because to him, you're not. You're a miracle he never expected. A second chance he thought he'd lost forever. Elena placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. He's terrified of losing you again. But he's also terrified of pushing too hard and driving you away. I don't know how to be someone's daughter, Maya confessed. I've been taking care of myself for so long. I don't know how to let someone else care about me. Then learn together, Elena suggested. Learn how to be a father and daughter together. There's no rule book, no timeline, just two people trying to figure out how to love each other, despite everything that's come between them. As they walked back toward Richard's office, Maya felt some of the tension in her chest ease. Elena was right. This was insane and complicated and probably impossible. But it was also hers. This broken, imperfect chance at family was hers. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth fighting for. Richard looked up as they approached, hope and fear warring in his expression. Maya met his eyes and managed a small smile. So, she said, settling into her desk chair, what's on the schedule for today? The relief that flooded Richard's face was answer enough. They were going to try. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be perfect, but they were going to try. And sometimes Elena thought, as she watched them navigate this new normal, trying was enough to build a miracle on. 6 weeks after the storage unit revelation, Maya had settled into an uneasy rhythm with Richard. They were polite, professional, careful, dancing around each other like strangers sharing space in a crowded elevator. At work, he was Mr. Sterling, and she was Ms. Chun. And they both pretended the weight of their shared history didn't fill every silence between them. But things were changing, slowly and subtly. Richard had started bringing her more complex assignments, projects that challenged her intelligence and showcased her abilities. Maya threw herself into the work with fierce determination, partly to prove herself and partly to avoid the complicated emotions that surfaced whenever she caught Richard watching her with that mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. Maya, Richard said, approaching her desk on a Tuesday morning, could you come into my office? I'd like to discuss something with you. Maya followed him into the glass-walled sanctuary, noting the way he moved, confident but careful, like a man walking on thin ice. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat, her posture straight and professional. I'm promoting you, he said without preamble. Maya blinked. Excuse me? To personal assistant. It comes with a significant salary increase, better benefits, and your own business cards. He slid a small white card across the desk. Maya Chun, executive assistant to the CEO. Maya stared at the card, her name printed in elegant font beneath the Sterling Tech logo. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely unexpected. Sir, I've only been here 6 weeks. 7 weeks and 3 days, Richard corrected. And in that time, you've revolutionized our filing system, streamlined our client communications, and caught 3 accounting errors that could have cost us thousands. You're overqualified for your current position. Maya picked up the business card, running her thumb over the raised lettering. People are going to talk. They're already talking. Let them talk. They're saying I'm sleeping with you, Maya said bluntly. Watching for his reaction, Richard's jaw tightened. Are you concerned about office gossip? I'm concerned about my reputation and yours. Maya set the card down carefully. If you promote me too quickly, people are going to assume the worst. They're going to think I'm getting special treatment because she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Because I'm your father, Richard said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. The first time either had acknowledged their relationship directly at work. Maya felt her chest tighten. Yes, she whispered. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Maya, can I ask you something? She nodded. If I weren't your father, if I were just Richard Sterling, CEO, and you are just Maya Chun, exceptional employee. Would you accept this promotion? Maya considered the question honestly. Yes, I've earned it. Then accept it now. Don't let our complicated history rob you of opportunities you've worked for. Maya was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. The promotion meant more money, more responsibility, more chances to prove herself. But it also meant more time working directly with Richard, more opportunities for their careful professional facade to slip. What would this position entail? Exactly. Managing my calendar, scheduling meetings, handling correspondence. You'd be my primary point of contact with department heads and clients. Richard's voice grew carefully neutral. You'd travel with me to conferences and client meetings when necessary. Travel? Business trips? Usually just overnight, occasionally longer. He paused. I understand if that makes you uncomfortable. Maya thought about it. The idea of spending hours on planes and in hotel lobbies with Richard Sterling, CEO, was daunting enough. The idea of doing it with Richard Sterling, estranged father, was terrifying, but it was also an opportunity she might never get again. I'll take it, she said, but I have conditions. Richard raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. At work, we maintain professional boundaries. No personal conversations during business hours, unless it's an emergency. No special treatment that isn't directly related to my job performance. And if anyone asks about our relationship, we tell them we're colleagues, Richard finished. Nothing more. Exactly. Richard stood and extended his hand. Congratulations, Miss Chun. I look forward to working with you. Maya shook his hand, feeling the formal gesture as a small bridge across the chasm between them. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Sterling. As word of Maya's promotion spread through the office, the reactions were immediate and varied. Some colleagues offered genuine congratulations, impressed by her rapid rise. Others whispered behind her back, their conversations stopping abruptly when she walked by. 7 weeks, she heard someone mutter in the break room. From nobody to the CEO's right hand in 7 weeks. Wonder what that took. Maya pretended not to hear, but the words stung. She'd worked harder in the past 2 months than she'd ever worked in her life, but to outsiders, it looked like favoritism. And in a way, maybe it was. Elena found her that afternoon, reorganizing Richard's filing cabinets with aggressive efficiency. Congratulations on the promotion, Elena said, settling into a chair. You deserve it. Do I? Maya asked without looking up. Or is he just trying to assuage his guilt by throwing money and titles at me? Both, probably, Elena said honestly. But that doesn't make you less qualified. You've earned this position, Maya. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Maya finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. How do I know the difference? How do I know when something is happening because I've earned it and when it's happening because he's my father? Elena was quiet for a moment. You don't, she said finally. That's the burden you'll carry as long as you work here. But Maya, I've been watching you for 7 weeks. I've seen how you work, how you think, how you solve problems. You didn't get this promotion because you're Richard's daughter. You got it because you're exceptional. That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment, staring at her new business card. It represented everything she'd ever wanted: stability, respect, a future with possibilities. But it also represented the complicated reality of having a father, who was also her boss. A man who held her career in his hands along with her heart. Her phone buzzed with a text from who? Richard, congratulations again. You're going to do great things. Maya stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you. I won't let you down. His reply came immediately. You never could. As Maya got ready for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the desperate girl who'd walked into Sterling Tech 7 weeks ago. This woman had a title, a business card, a future. This woman was someone's daughter, even if that relationship was complicated and fragile. Tomorrow, she would face the whispers and the questions and the weight of expectations. Tomorrow, she would prove that Maya Chun, executive assistant, was more than capable of handling whatever challenges came her way. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of pride. She'd earned this. Despite everything, despite the complicated circumstances and the whispered accusations, she'd earned this. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a future on. The private investigator's report landed on Richard's desk on a Thursday evening after Maya had left for the day. The manila envelope was thick, stuffed with documents and photographs. that represented 13 years of his daughter's life condensed into cold, clinical facts. Richard stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before finding the courage to open it. The first photograph made his breath catch. Maya at 16, thin and hollow-eyed, standing outside a hospital. The investigator's notes indicated this was taken during her mother's final round of chemotherapy. Maya's smile was forced, her hand gripping Sarah's wheelchair like an anchor dot page. After Page revealed the life Richard had missed. Report cards showing straight A's despite frequent school changes. Work permits filed when Maya was just 15. Lying about her age to get jobs that would help pay for her mother's medical bills. A high school withdrawal form, signed when Sarah's condition worsened and Maya became her full-time caregiver. Subject: completed her GED at age 17 while working 3 part-time jobs. The report noted, demonstrated exceptional academic ability despite irregular educational circumstances. Richard's hands shook as he turned the pages. Here was documentation of every sacrifice Maya had made, every dream she'd deferred, every moment when she'd been forced to grow up too fast because he hadn't been there to shoulder the burden. Bank records showed the desperate financial juggling act Sarah and Maya had performed in the final months. Medical bills piling up, credit cards maxed out, utilities threatened with disconnection. The investigator had found evidence of Maya selling her textbooks, her laptop, even jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. Subject maintained 3.9 GPA while working 40 hours per week. Another note read, teachers consistently noted exceptional intelligence and maturity beyond her years. But it was the personal details that destroyed him. A parking ticket issued to Maya's car at 2 a.m. outside the hospital the night her mother died. Security footage showing Maya sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, her head in her hands, looking lost and broken and utterly alone. Employment records painted a picture of relentless determination. Maya had worked as a cashier, a cleaning lady, a dog walker, a tutoring assistant, never staying anywhere long enough to advance. Always moving on when bill collectors found their latest address or when landlords raised rents beyond their means. Subject demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, the investigator had written. Despite numerous setbacks and limited resources, maintained focus on education and self-improvement. Richard found himself crying as he read about Maya's attempts to attend community college. She'd enrolled twice, only to drop out both times when financial crises demanded her immediate attention. The second time, she'd been just 3 credits away from completing her associate's degree. The most damaging entry was near the end of the report. A social worker's note from 2 years ago, when someone had reported Maya and her mother as potentially homeless. The investigation had been brief. Both Maya and Sarah were articulate and determined to maintain their independence. But the caseworker's assessment was telling. Young woman appears to be carrying inappropriate burden for her age. Mother's illness has reversed typical parent-child dynamic. Subject exhibits signs of chronic stress and premature adult responsibilities. Despite challenges, demonstrates remarkable emotional maturity and protective instincts toward mother. The final pages contained character references the investigator had gathered. Maya's former boss at a coffee shop, hardest worker I've ever seen, never complained, never called in sick, always covered other people's shifts when they needed help. A teacher from her high school, Maya Chun was one of the most promising students I ever taught. Her withdrawal was a tragedy. She had the potential to go anywhere, do anything. I often wonder what happened to her. A neighbor from their last apartment. That girl was devoted to her mother. I'd see her coming home from work at midnight, then getting up at 5 to take Sarah to doctor's appointments. Never saw her bring friends around or do normal teenager things. She was too busy taking care of everyone else. Richard closed the file, overwhelmed by the weight of everything his daughter had endured. Maya hadn't just survived their abandonment, she'd thrived despite it. She'd sacrificed her own dreams to care for her dying mother, worked multiple jobs while maintaining stellar grades, and faced homelessness with dignity and determination. He thought about the girl who'd walked into his office 2 months ago, crumpled resume in hand. She'd seemed desperate then, but now he understood it differently. Maya hadn't been desperate, she'd been strategic. She'd researched sterling tech, prepared for the interview, dressed as professionally as her limited wardrobe allowed, even living in her car. She'd maintained her focus on building a better future. Richard picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized, but never called. Northwest Community College, admissions office. Yes, I'm calling about a former student, Maya Chun. She was enrolled in your associate's degree program, but had to withdraw due to family circumstances. I'd like to know what it would take for her to re-enroll and complete her degree. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. By the end, Richard had a clear understanding of Maya's academic requirements and the financial assistance available to her. He also learned something that made his chest tighten with pride. Maya had been on the dean's list both semesters she'd attended. Next, he called his attorney. David, I need you to set up an education fund. I want it structured so the beneficiary can't trace it back to me, at least not immediately. Make it look like a need-based scholarship or grant. Richard, what's this about? It's about making sure someone gets the opportunities they've earned but can't afford. After hanging up, Richard sat alone in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his daughter's remarkable resilience. Maya had spent 13 years proving she didn't need him, and she'd done it brilliantly. She'd raised herself, cared for her mother, and built a foundation for her future with nothing but determination and intelligence. But now she had a father again, whether she'd asked for one or not, and Richard was determined to ensure that Maya's future held all the opportunities her past had denied her. He couldn't undo 13 years of absence. He couldn't erase the hardships she'd faced or the dreams she'd deferred, but he could make sure that from this moment forward, Maya Chun had every chance to become everything she was capable of being. The education fund would be the first step. Anonymous for now, but someday when their relationship was stronger, when the wounds had healed, he would tell her the truth, that her father had spent 13 years regretting his choices, and that he intended to spend the rest of his life ensuring she never had to choose between her dreams and her survival. Again, Richard locked the investigator's report in his desk drawer, but the images would stay with him forever. Maya at 16, shouldering burdens that should have been his. Maya at 17, signing withdrawal forms to care for her dying mother. Maya at 18, sitting alone in a hospital cafeteria, facing the future with nothing but her own strength to carry her forward. She was extraordinary. She always had been. And Richard Sterling, successful CEO and failed father, was going to spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the remarkable woman his daughter had become. Maya was updating Richard's calendar when she noticed the medical appointment blocked out for the following Tuesday. LabCorp Personal. The entry read, scheduled for 3 p.m. with no additional details. She made a note to remind him the day before, then continued with her work. It was the third medical appointment she'd scheduled for him in 2 weeks, which seemed unusual for someone who appeared to be in perfect health. Richard was meticulous about his fitness, arrived at work every morning, looking polished and energetic, and had never mentioned any health concerns. The appointments were always brief, always marked personal, and always followed by blocks of time when he seemed distracted and anxious. As his personal assistant, Maya had access to his email, his calendar, his phone calls. It was her job to manage his schedule, coordinate his meetings, and handle his correspondence. But lately, she'd begun to notice patterns that didn't quite make sense. A Google search history accidentally left open on his computer. How to tell adult child you're their parent. Rebuilding relationship with estranged daughter. DNA paternity testing accuracy. He'd closed the browser quickly when she'd entered his office, but not before she'd caught a glimpse of the searches. Phone calls that ended abruptly when she walked into the room. Conversations with his attorney that seemed to involve education, funds, and trust accounts. A stack of college brochures hidden beneath quarterly reports on his desk. And then there were Elena's comments, growing more pointed each day. You know, Maya, you have the most unusual eyes, Elena had said that morning, studying her face intently. Very distinctive color, almost like storm clouds. My mother used to say that, Maya replied, not thinking much of it. Did she? And what about your father? Did he have similar eyes? Maya had looked up from her filing, puzzled by the question. I wouldn't know. I never met him. Elena's expression had grown thoughtful. Never met him at all? He left when I was a baby. Why? Just curious. You remind me of someone, but I can't quite place who. These conversations were becoming frequent. Elena, asking seemingly innocent questions about Maya's family, her childhood, her mother. Maya had initially assumed Elena was just being friendly, but now she wondered if there was something more deliberate about the inquiries. The revelation came on a Friday afternoon, when Maya was organizing Richard's desk drawers to install new filing dividers. The bottom drawer stuck, and when she finally worked it open, several papers fell to the floor. She was gathering them up when she saw it, a copy of her birth certificate. Maya sat back on her heels, staring at the document in confusion. Why would Richard have a copy of her birth certificate? She studied it more carefully, noting details she'd never paid attention to before. Her full name, Maya Elena Rodriguez. Her mother's name, Sarah Rodriguez. And in the space marked father, Richard Michael Sterling. The paper trembled in her hands. Richard Michael Sterling. The same Richard Sterling who was her boss, who had given her a job when she was desperate, who had been watching her with those careful, guilty eyes for 2 months. She heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly shoved the birth certificate back into the drawer, her heart pounding. But her mind was racing, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The way Richard had reacted when he'd first read her resume, his face going pale at the name Maya Chun, his strange behavior around her, the way he watched her work with something that looked like pride and sorrow mixed together, the medical appointments that had to be DNA tests, Elena's persistent questions about her family. Maya managed to finish organizing the drawer and return to her desk. But her hands shook as she tried to type. Everything made sense. Now the promotion she didn't quite deserve, the special attention, the careful way Richard spoke to her, as if every word mattered more than it should. He was her father. The man who had abandoned her and her mother was sitting 30 feet away, pretending to be nothing more than her employer. Maya stared through the glass wall at Richard, who was on a conference call, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. He looked successful, confident, completely in control. This was the man her mother had loved, the man who had left them to build his empire while they struggled to survive. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Can you stop by my office before you leave today? I'd like to chat." Maya stared. The message, wondering how much Elena knew, how long this charade had been going on. Was everyone in on the secret? Was she the only one who hadn't known that Maya Chun was working for her own father? The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. Maya completed her tasks mechanically, responding to emails and scheduling meetings, while her mind processed the enormity of what she'd discovered. Every interaction with Richard took on new meaning, every careful comment, every moment when he'd seemed to struggle with what to say. When 5 o'clock came, Maya knocked on Elena's office door, her emotions carefully controlled. "Come in, dear," Elena said, gesturing to a chair. "How are you settling into your new position?" "Fine," Maya said, her voice steady. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How long have you known who I am?" Elena's face went very still. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I found my birth certificate in his desk drawer," Maya said quietly. "Richard Michael Sterling. That's my father's name on my birth certificate." Elena closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "I was hoping he'd tell you himself." "How long have you known?" "I suspected from the day you walked in. You looked just like him at your age. But I wasn't certain until I saw you together, saw how he looked at you." Elena's voice grew gentle. "He's been looking for you for years, Maya. Hiring investigators, following leads that never went anywhere. When you showed up here, it was like his prayers had been answered. And you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I thought he deserved the chance to tell you himself when he was ready. I thought you both deserved the chance to get to know each other without the weight of the past crushing everything." Maya laughed bitterly. "Get to know each other? He's been lying to me for 2 months. You've both been lying to me. He's been trying to protect you and himself. He's terrified you'll leave again if you know the truth." "Well, he's right about that," Maya said, standing up. "I can't do this, Elena. I can't work for him knowing what I know now. I can't pretend. Everything is normal when my entire life has been built around the hole he left behind." Elena stood as well, reaching out as if to stop her. "Maya, please. Give him a chance to explain. Give yourself a chance to understand what really happened." "I understand perfectly," Maya said, her voice breaking. "He left. He chose his career over his family, and now he's trying to ease his guilt by playing the generous employer. Well, I don't need his charity, and I don't need his protection. Maya left Elena's office and returned to her desk to pack up her personal belongings. Richard was still in his meeting, oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. Maya pulled out a piece of company letterhead and began to write her resignation. "Dear Mr. Sterling," she began, then stopped. "How did you quit a job when your boss was also the father who'd abandoned you? How did you walk away from the man who'd given you everything and taken everything away?" Maya crumpled up the letter and started again. This time, she kept it simple. "Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as executive assistant. Thank you for the opportunity. Maya-chan." She placed the letter on Richard's desk, gathered her few possessions, and walked toward the elevator. Through the glass wall, she could see Richard still on his call, still gesturing, still completely unaware that his daughter was walking out of his life for the second time. As the elevator doors closed, Maya caught a glimpse of Elena standing in the hallway, her face filled with sorrow and regret. Maya closed her eyes and tried to imagine what came next, where she would go, what she would do now that everything she'd built over the past 2 months had turned out to be an elaborate lie. The elevator descended 30 floors, carrying her away from the father she'd finally found and immediately lost again. Maya-chan was alone once more, but this time she knew exactly why. Richard found the resignation letter when he returned from his meeting, the single sheet of paper sitting in the center of his otherwise immaculate desk like a death sentence. His hands shook as he read Maya's carefully neutral words, each one a nail in the coffin of the relationship he'd been desperately trying to build. "Elena," he called, his voice carrying an edge of panic that made several employees look up from their work. Elena appeared in his doorway within seconds, her face grave. She found the birth certificate. Richard sank into his chair, the resignation letter still clutched in his hand. "When?" "This afternoon. She came to my office asking how long I'd known who she was." Elena stepped into the office and closed the door. She was hurt, Richard, and angry. She felt like we'd been lying to her. "We were lying to her," Richard said quietly. "I was lying to her. Every day for 2 months, I looked at my daughter and pretended to be nothing more than her boss." "You were trying to protect her." "I was trying to protect myself," Richard corrected. "I was a coward, just like I was 13 years ago. I was so afraid of losing her again that I ended up driving her away anyway." Elena sat down across from him, her expression compassionate but firm. "It's not too late. You can still fix this." "How?" "She won't even talk to me. She resigned rather than face me." Richard laughed bitterly. "Do you know what her letter says? Thank you for the opportunity. Like I did her some kind of favor by letting her work for the father who abandoned her. She's processing. Give her time to think, to feel whatever she needs to feel, then try again." Richard shook his head. "You didn't see her face when she left. She looked at me the same way her mother did the night I walked out, like I was everything wrong with the world. Then prove her wrong." Before Richard could respond, his former assistant, he corrected himself, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Sterling, Maya's back. She's asking to see you." Richard's heart stopped. "Send her in." Maya walked into his office with the controlled composure of someone who'd spent an hour in her car working up the courage for this conversation. She closed the door behind her and faced him across the desk that had become a battlefield. "You're my father," she said without preamble. Richard's throat closed. "Yes, you've known who I was since the day I walked in here. Yes, you've been lying to me for 2 months. Yes." Richard stood, his hands pressed flat against the desk. "Maya, I can explain." "Explain what?" Maya's carefully controlled facade cracked, revealing the raw hurt underneath. "Explain how you recognized your own daughter and decided not to tell her? Explain how you let me pour my heart out about my father being a coward who abandoned his family while you sat there knowing you were that coward." "I was trying to protect you? Protect me?" Maya's voice rose. "From what?" "From knowing that my father was successful and wealthy while my mother worked herself to death trying to pay our bills? From knowing that you could have helped us any time you wanted, but chose not to?" Richard flinched as if she'd slapped him. "I looked for you. I hired investigators." "Not hard enough," Maya cut him off. "We weren't hiding, Richard. We were broke and desperate and moving constantly because we couldn't afford to stay anywhere. But we weren't hiding. If you'd really wanted to find us, You would have. Your mother made it clear she didn't want me in your life. My mother was 22 years old with a baby and no support system, Maya shot back. Maybe if you'd tried to be a father instead of a wallet, she would have felt differently. Richard came around the desk, needing to close the physical distance between them. Maya, please. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? Maya backed away from him, her eyes blazing. You didn't make mistakes, Richard. You made choices. You chose your career over your family. You chose your comfort over your responsibility. You chose yourself over your daughter. You're right, Richard said quietly. Everything you're saying is right. I was selfish and young and stupid, and I made the worst decision of my life when I left you and your mother. Then why didn't you tell me who you were when I came here? Why did you let me think I was just another employee? Richard stopped advancing, keeping his distance, but holding her gaze. Because I was terrified. Because I knew that if you found out who I was, you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me now. Like I'm a stranger who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. You are a stranger, Maya said, her voice breaking. I don't know you at all. The man I've been working for, the man who's been kind to me and given me opportunities, that's not real. That's just you trying to ease your guilty conscience. That's not true, isn't it? Maya pulled something from her pocket. A worn hospital bracelet, the plastic yellowed with age. I found this in your desk, too. My hospital bracelet from when I was born. You kept it for 17 years while you ignored my existence. Richard's face went pale. I never ignored your existence. Not a day went by that I didn't think about you. Thinking about me isn't the same as being there for me, Maya said, throwing the bracelet onto his desk. Do you know what it's like to grow up believing your father didn't want you? Do you know what it's like to watch your mother work 3 jobs while battling cancer because there's no one else to help? Maya, I used to make up stories about you, she continued, tears streaming down her face. I told myself you were a soldier overseas, or a scientist on a secret mission, or that you were dead. Anything was better than believing you just didn't care enough to stay. Richard felt his own tears starting. I cared. God, Maya, I cared so much it nearly destroyed me. But I was 24 and scared out of my mind, and I convinced myself that you'd be better off without me. Well, congratulations, Maya said bitterly. You got what you wanted. We managed just fine without you. Mom raised an incredible daughter all by herself, and I learned how to be strong and independent and never need anyone. I can see that, Richard said softly. You're extraordinary, Maya. You're everything I hoped you'd become and more. Don't, Maya warned. Don't you dare try to take credit for who I am. You had nothing to do with that. That's all Mom, all the teachers and neighbors and strangers who cared about me when my own father couldn't be bothered. Richard reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a photograph, the faded picture he'd kept hidden for 17 years. I never stopped caring. I never stopped hoping I'd get a chance to make things right. Maya stared at the photo, seeing herself as a baby in Richard's arms. He looked young and terrified and completely overwhelmed, but there was love in his expression, unmistakable, desperate love. If you loved me so much, why didn't you fight for me? She whispered. Because I didn't think I deserved to, Richard admitted. Because I was ashamed of what I'd done and convinced that I'd only make things worse. Your mother was better than me in every way that mattered. I thought you'd be better off with just her. That wasn't your choice to make, Maya said. You didn't get to decide what was best for me. You were my father. Your job was to stay and figure it out, not run away when things got hard. I know that now, Richard said. I've known it for 17 years. But I can't go back and make different choices, Maya. All I can do is try to be the father you deserve now. It's too late for that, Maya said, her voice hollow. I'm not a little girl who needs her daddy anymore. I'm a grown woman who's learned to take care of herself. I don't need you now. Maybe you don't need me, Richard said quietly. But I need you. I've needed you every day for 17 years. And I was too much of a coward to admit it. Maya picked up the hospital bracelet from his desk, turning it over in her hands. You know what the worst part is? For 2 months, I actually started to believe I had found something good, a job I was good at, a boss who believed in me, a future that looked bright. And now I find out it was all built on a lie. It wasn't a lie, Richard insisted. Your job performance, your promotion, your future, none of that was because you're my daughter. It was because you're brilliant and capable and everything this company needs. I'll never know that for sure, will I? Maya said. I'll never know if I earned any of it, or if it was just guilt money from a father who abandoned his child. Richard felt something breaking inside his chest. What can I do? Tell me what I can do to fix this. Maya looked at him for a long moment. This stranger who was her father, this successful man who had once been a scared boy who'd made the worst choice of his life. You can let me go, she said finally. You can stop trying to force a relationship. That should have happened naturally 17 years ago. You can accept that some things can't be fixed, no matter how much money you throw at them. Maya, please. I quit, Richard. Not just the job, this whole thing. This pretense that we can somehow become a family after all this time. Maya headed for the door, then turned back one last time. I hope you got everything you wanted from your career. I hope it was worth it. After she left, Richard stood alone in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of his second chance. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. But inside, Richard Sterling's successful CEO and failed father faced the terrible truth that some mistakes could never be unmade, and some chances, once lost, never came again. But even as despair threatened to consume him, a small voice in his head whispered that this wasn't over. Maya was his daughter, and she was hurt and angry and had every right. Maya sat in her car outside Sterling Tech for 2 hours after the confrontation, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she tried to process what had just happened. The parking garage was nearly empty now, most employees having gone home to their families, their normal lives, their relationships that weren't built on 17 years of lies and abandonment. She'd quit her job. She'd walked away from the best opportunity she'd ever had, from financial security, from a future that had finally looked bright. But what choice did she have? How could she continue working for a man who'd been lying to her face every single day for 2 months? The worst part was that she'd started to trust him. Richard Sterling, the successful CEO who'd given a desperate girl a chance, had seemed like a guardian angel. He'd been kind, encouraging, generous with opportunities and praise. For the first time in her life, Maya had felt like someone believed in her potential. Now she knew it had all been guilt. Every promotion, every kind word, every moment when he'd looked at her with something that seemed like pride, it had all been his attempt to assuage his conscience for the daughter he'd abandoned. Maya pulled out her phone and typed a simple text. I quit. Don't contact me again. She hesitated for a moment, then deleted it without sending. What was the point? She'd already said everything that needed to be said. Instead, she drove to the small studio apartment she'd been so proud to afford just weeks ago. Now, without her job, she'd be lucky to keep it for another month. A security deposit and first month's rent she'd managed to scrape together would have to last until she found new employment. And who knew how long that would take? Maya sat on her second-hand couch, staring at the business cards she'd been so excited to receive just days ago. Maya Chun, executive assistant to the CEO. The title felt like a mockery now, a reminder of how quickly her life could crumble when it was built on someone else's foundation. Her phone buzzed with a call from Elena. Maya let it go to voicemail. Then another call, then another. Finally, she turned the phone off entirely. She couldn't deal with Elena's well-meaning attempts to mediate, couldn't handle any more revelations about how many people had known the truth while she'd been living in ignorance. That night, Maya didn't sleep. She sat at her tiny kitchen table with her laptop, updating her resume and browsing job sites. But every posting seemed inadequate after the work she'd been doing at Sterling Tech. Administrative assistant positions at small companies, receptionist jobs, data entry work. Everything felt like a step backward from the life she'd been building. By morning, exhaustion and reality had set in. Maya had exactly $847 in her checking account, rent due in 3 weeks, and no job prospects that would pay enough to keep her afloat. She'd left Sterling Tech on principle, but principles didn't pay bills. She spent the day at coffee shops and the public library, filling out applications and trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Every potential employer wanted references, wanted to know why she'd left her last position so suddenly, wanted explanations she couldn't give without revealing the complicated truth. Personal differences with management, she wrote on application after application, knowing how weak it sounded. By Tuesday, Maya was living on ramen noodles and growing desperate. She'd had 2 interviews, both for positions that paid half what she'd been making at Sterling Tech. One receptionist job seemed promising until the employer called Sterling Tech for a reference, then suddenly became unavailable. Maya didn't need to guess what Richard had told them. He probably hadn't said anything overtly negative. He was too smart for that. But tone and hesitation could communicate volumes. Her former boss was either protecting himself or trying to force her to come back. Either way, he was destroying her chances of moving forward. On Wednesday morning, Maya woke up to find her car wouldn't start. The battery was dead, and she didn't have money for both a replacement and rent. Standing in the parking lot of her apartment complex, staring at the car that had been her lifeline for so many months, Maya felt the familiar weight of despair settling on her shoulders. She was back where she'd started, broke, alone, and running out of options. That afternoon, she swallowed her pride and called the coffee shop where she'd worked before, Sterling Tech. The manager was sympathetic but firm. They'd already filled her old position, and with the economy tightening, they weren't hiring. Maya tried 3 more former employers with the same result. Word had gotten around somehow that she'd quit Sterling Tech abruptly. And in the small world of entry-level employment, that kind of instability was a red flag. By Thursday, Maya was considering options she'd hoped never to face again. She could probably sleep in her car once more, at least until the weather turned cold. She could sell her few possessions, stretch her money for another month or 2. She could call the social services office, swallow her pride completely, and ask for help. Or she could call Richard. The thought made her sick, but she couldn't ignore the practical reality. One phone call could solve all her problems. Richard would take her back. She was certain of that. He'd probably increase her salary, improve her benefits, maybe even offer to pay for her education. All she had to do was forgive him, pretend that 17 years of abandonment could be erased by professional opportunities and paternal guilt. Maya stared at her phone, Richard's number highlighted in her contacts. It would be so easy. One call, one conversation, one compromise of her principles, and she could have her life back. But what kind of life would it be? How could she work for him knowing that every opportunity was tainted by their relationship? How could she look at him every day and not wonder whether she'd earned her position or simply inherited it through accident of birth? Maya put her phone away without making the call. That evening, she drafted a letter to her mother's memory, something she'd never done before. She wrote about the impossible choice she was facing, about the father who'd finally appeared but brought more pain than healing. She wrote about feeling lost and alone and angry at the world for being so complicated. "I wish you were here, Mom," she wrote. "I wish you could tell me what to do, whether I should try to forgive him or just walk away completely. I wish you could tell me whether the love in those old photographs was real or just something I imagined because I wanted it to be true." As she sealed the letter in an envelope she'd never send, Maya made a decision. She wouldn't call Richard, wouldn't go back to Sterling Tech, wouldn't compromise her principles for financial security. She'd figure out another way, just as she always had. She was Maya Chun, and she'd survived worse than this. She'd survived her father's abandonment, her mother's death, homelessness, and despair. She could survive this too. But as she prepared for another sleepless night, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was making the same mistake her father had made 17 years ago, choosing pride over family, independence over love, principle over the messy, complicated reality of human relationships. The difference was, she told herself she'd never had a choice about her father leaving, but she did have a choice about whether to let him back in. And right now, alone in her small apartment with bills she couldn't pay and a future that looked increasingly uncertain, Maya Chun chose to face the world on her own terms, even if those terms led nowhere but back to the beginning.